without further ado, our first speaker is Deirdre Morrison, and she's going to be talking to us about courageous listening. Do you really hear what your tech team is saying? So Deirdre specialises in applied neuroscience, and she works with individuals and organisations to develop leadership capabilities. As well as running her consultancy and training business, Neurocreative Studio, she leads innovation and strategy development for the Institute of Organisational Neuroscience. So I'd like to welcome Deirdre to the stand, and if you get a warm welcome, round of applause.
So thank you, Nicola, and thank you for getting through that very long and multisyllabic title that I have acquired somewhere along the way. So I know we've had a little bit of a wait here, just kind of sitting around and wondering a little bit what's going to happen here today. So while you're sitting waiting for something, while there's a blank space, if you are feeling that there's maybe a delay in the proceedings, what's going through your head? Think about this for a second. Maybe you might be saying, oh gosh, I don't have time for this. I've got better things to do. Maybe they could get a move on. What is this supposed to be anyway? What am I going to get out of this? Maybe I should have gone to the Furby talk. So I'm hoping you won't still be thinking that by the end, by the way. But there's always someone who is wondering what else they could be doing, or feeling like they maybe need to think about other things rather than be here and be now. Now, the point behind all of that is that I want us to take a minute to notice the fact that we all have basically a cast of thousands inside our own heads. And we have all of these voices that are chipping in and giving us these little things that are maybe not relevant and are maybe not helpful. But we don't often notice them. They're just there. They're part of our own white noise. Thing is, though, what they say changes what we hear, for better or worse. So it is important to pay a little bit of attention to them. And with that in mind, we will move on to the topic of the day, which is courageous listening. So what does it even mean to be courageous when we're listening? And how can applied neuroscience help us to get better at it? So we've got about 30 minutes here today to dig into this. And buckle up, because it is going to be really a whistle-stop tour. We don't have a lot of time. We're going to scrape the surface, basically, but let's see what we can do. And by the way, I really do appreciate that you're here and not with the Furbies. Now, we all know that it can be really hard to speak up sometimes if you've got something to say that you're not sure how it's going to be received. Maybe you don't know how you're going to be seen after you say something. And we all know that in those instances, it can take courage to speak. But when or why does it take courage to listen? Sometimes it doesn't. I mean, sometimes we're hearing great things, and that's fine. All the stuff that's coming at us is interesting and good, and it basically supports our world. And even sometimes when we hear something that we don't want to hear, but we have in place the support and the resources and the people around us to help us through it, then that's okay. We're not really needing courage to hear that. But what happens when it isn't like that? What happens when someone comes to you and they want to tell you about a problem, and it is just one of another 150 that you're trying to deal with already? What happens when they tell you something that is going to tear down everything that you've been working on, everything that you've been depending on? Maybe they're telling you something that is going to impact your reputation or your position. Or maybe they're telling you something that contradicts your beliefs. Requiring the courage to hear what's being said, to be able to take that on board, that's a real thing. But the good news is that we can cultivate it. So Nicola already did a great job in introducing me. I don't really need to do much more of that, so I'm going to skip past all that stuff. But one thing I would say is today, when we're here for this 30 minutes or so, if you can just, try and be as open as you can to what you're going to hear, And also, think about whether you're open to something better than ways that you already do things. You might hear things today that aren't new to you, but what I would ask of you in that case is to check in with yourself and ask yourself what it is that you do and how it is that you use the things that you already know. Are they just information sitting on a shelf, or are you putting them into practice? So with that in mind, has anyone here done any training on listening or communication before? Yeah? Yeah? A few. Definitely a few in the room. That's good. Okay, so some of the stuff that we're told when we are being given information about how to listen is don't interrupt, ask good questions, make sure you're looping for understanding so that you've checking in with what you've heard to make sure you got it right. Now, don't get me wrong, all of these are great things to do. These are really, really useful tools to have, and they work best when you're actually open to what you're about to hear, when you are open to what that person is telling you. But take a moment now and notice, now that we've started thinking about this idea of the courage to listen, is there anything, is there a situation, are there people who are coming to your mind where you're thinking, maybe I need to be a little bit braver, a bit more courageous? And that's often in those situations where we don't particularly want to hear what's being said, where that is going against what it is that we're trying to do. Think back to the cast of thousands that we mentioned earlier. Are any of those voices chiming in those situations that are coming to your mind? These are the situations where we need courage. Why do we need courage? When will we get to the bit where the neuroscience helps us with it? Well, very soon. I am not going to reveal anything too startling or too shocking in this situation. This is very much back to basics. People get a bit precious about oversimplifying neuroscience, but I think that we really need to start at the beginning and build it up. Making these things as simple as they need to be is really the only way that we can make them useful. It's the way to open doors so that people can walk through and start finding new and better ways of doing things. If we just overcomplicate and make things too technical, then they're no good to anyone. And I know I'm in a technical room, but even so, I would go out on a limb and say that. We're going to start with some very straightforward stuff, and hopefully that little taster will encourage you to dive deeper into this and go further down this rabbit hole. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is brain logic, or what I refer to as brain logic. We're going to add to that some things about neuroplasticity, and then we're going to talk a little bit about prediction. And I don't mean that in a Mystic Meg kind of way. I'm thinking more like, an analyst kind of way. And I know you guys are going to be able to come with me and follow me as I weave these things together. And please do bear with me, because it'll seem like I'm jumping all over the place. But what I'm trying to do is join the dots between these different things so that we can see how they are all interdependent on each other. Everything is connected, as they say. So it's not going to be overly linear, but things will refer back to each other, and they will build a picture of what we're trying to do here today. So this first concept, which is just my way of referring to the fact that your brain is incredibly capable, but it doesn't always think in the way that would make sense to us in our rational kind of persona. We know more and more about how the brain works day by day, but we still only know this tiny sliver of what it is that there is to be known about it. One thing that we do know, though, is that when it comes to energy consumption, it is a greedy little bugger. It uses up about 20% of the calories that you get through in a day, assuming that you've got a fairly average, typical lifestyle. And proportionately, that's a lot. So consider the weight of your brain, which is about 3 pounds or so, compared to the rest of you, and it is sucking up 20% of the energy that you're using. So it gets a little bit conservative when it comes to unnecessary energy use. When we say unnecessary, that's a very subjective word in this instance. but energy that it doesn't see a reason for, it gets quite conservative for that. So that's one thing. We're going to loop back to that later. And the next thing is neuroplasticity. And this is this incredible capacity that our brains have for learning and change and adaptability. And that's the technical term that we use for it, neuroplasticity. The fact that we have neuroplasticity, that our brains are plastic and can change, just makes so much possible. So what do these two things have to do with our ability to listen better and more courageously? Well, sometimes hearing what we don't want to hear, or hearing what contradicts what we already know or have worked on or have learned, that signals to our brain that we might have to exert some energy on learning something different, something new, doing something a different way. And that can result in what might feel like resistance. Resistance to change, especially if we're already overloaded, overstimulated, running to stand still. So what does resistance to change look like in communication terms? It can look like being impatient. When are we going to get this done? Can you just get on with it, don't bother me. It can look like dismissiveness, the classic eye rolls and deep sighs and making a mountain out of a molehill. Defensiveness. This isn't my fault. I blame you guys, I blame the technicians, I blame the space, I blame the Weetabix or the unicorns or whatever it is, but it's definitely not me. I'm right. Argumentativeness, that's a very long word as well, isn't it? I don't agree with this. I'm sticking to my guns, even if my argument doesn't make a lot of sense. I am just digging my heels in because I do not want to change. Denial. The earth is flat, and you cannot persuade me otherwise. Tuning out, just, zoning out, looking out the window. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What were you saying? All that sort of stuff. And there are lots of other examples. This is not a comprehensive list. I'm sure if you think about it, you'll probably start dropping in some other ones, sarcasm, silent treatment, passive-aggressive responses. All of these things can signal that we are resisting. And the thing about this is that they are all strategies. They're strategies that our brain is using to protect us. And they're protecting us from the onerous task of having to change our minds, like literally change them by forming new neural connections. And we commonly refer to that as rewiring. I mean, it's not like electronics rewiring, but, it's a good analogy. Now, does this approach that our brain adopts in its unique take on logic mean that we can't do better? Does it mean that these are the best strategies? Of course not. Take a moment now to think about how hard it can be to say something that's problematic, something that is going to cause a problem for someone else, something that we don't know what the response is going to be. How often do we hesitate before we get those words out? Now, when we're in the listening seat, are we helping or hindering the person who is trying to get the words out? Take a second and think about how we know that we're really being listened to. Think of a time that you really felt heard. What do you remember experiencing in that? What were the thoughts, the sensations, and the emotions that you noticed in that? So when someone is listening to us, they're not just taking in our words. They are taking in our movements, our hesitations. It's not about arguing. It's not about reacting. They're not judging. They're engaged, and they are with us. So how do you listen? Does that add up for you? Is that your kind of demonstrable traits when you're listening? When someone is trying to tell you something, Is that your list? Is there something else? I've probably missed stuff that is positive as well, by the way. So again, not comprehensive. But are all of those things present when you're listening to something that you don't want to hear? You know, I once found myself in a work situation that was becoming increasingly unsustainable and toxic. And anytime I approached my then manager to discuss it, the message that I got back loud and clear was, look, I don't have time for this. I have too much on. Why are you doing this to me? Basically, go away and stop bothering me was what I was told. And you know, I absolutely understand that they were under exactly the amount of pressure that they were saying they were under, but the end result is still the same. I left. So it wasn't easy to admit that I was struggling in the situation. And it was even harder to realize that nothing I said was going to change it because they could not hear me. So, you know, in this instance, I was the team, I was doing my bit for bravery, and it would have changed a lot if that person had been able to find the courage to hear what I had to say to them. So what might it have looked like for that manager to be brave, to find the courage to get beyond their immediate concerns and to hear what was actually coming out from the team? So if we stand in the shoes of that person who is in that pressured situation, you know, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of client demands that are coming in pretty much 24/7. It never really stops. That whole startup vibe as well meant that, you know, nothing was sure, nothing was secure. Income, contracts, none of that really supported any sense of security. And that added a lot of uncertainty to the situation. And in brain terms, uncertainty is very bad stuff. We do not like it. Now, to be fair, our brains tend to lean a little bit towards the drama queen end of the scale, especially when we're in what I would refer to as suboptimal states. Now, that can include things like being tired, being hungry, and obviously being stressed. Our entire system has evolved with one primary objective. Anyone want to guess what that is, by the way? Thank you. Yes, survival. Well done. So as we tie all of this together, let's think about how courageous listening relates to that drive to survive. So why is it also sometimes at odds with this idea that we are trying to survive? And how can we offset it in order to have better communication and develop the courage to really hear what people are telling us? Okay, so your brain, with the survival thing, takes the whole safety mission very, very seriously. And it can become quite overzealous in its approach to protecting us. It's got this kind of protective overdrive, and it goes into that a lot. So imminent death, overdrive. Embarrassment, overdrive. And actually, you know, there's a really interesting thing about our use of language and how it shows us how our brain processes this stuff. Because we have this word, mortified, mortification, all these words that are related to embarrassment, they actually come from the Latin root for death, right? So, and if you think about it, you say, I nearly died of embarrassment. Yeah? That is a clue. These phrases, these are ways that we are getting a little bit of insight into how our brain is treating these situations. And obviously, it's not just about embarrassment, but you know that's a good example here, I think, to get under the hood of this brain logic. So we've talked about that brain logic. The unconscious brain logic is maybe a better way of putting it, and energy conservation. And we've talked a bit about change resistance. So now let's hit the third thing on this list. We have learned so much over the course of a lifetime, and it's all that neuroplasticity that we've talked about, all that ability to learn just working away. And some of what we've learned is still useful, some of it is no longer useful, and some of it is downright maladaptive. Now, because of the energy conservation prioritization, when your brain learns something and uses it repeatedly, and you're still alive, as far as it's concerned, that is job done. Yeah? So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why do we have to change? Because that takes a lot of energy. Now, the brain also develops a sort of a shortcut system. And the reason for this is it wants to get you to safety as quickly as possible. It wants to just analyze like that and then get you out of there if you have to. So we know the phrase flight, fight, freeze, flee, all these things. It makes those decisions super, super quick. Now, the thing is that they can be very, very hard to spot. And the brain does these analyses very, very quickly. So it'll go through everything that it knows and match that with the situation that you're facing and decide what to do before you have had a thought. This is beyond your kind of beyond your ability to think that fast. So the other thing that we have to mention here is that the physical responses are key to this as well. And this is going to get more interesting as we go on. Now, the scientist Lisa Feldman Barrett, she says emotions are built, they're not built in. And what we mean by that is that we are using this information from all of the experiences that we've had and the information that is coming from the stimulation around us to decide on a best course of action to get us through this situation safely. So we have the stimulation, we have the past experiences and analysis. These start to produce, then our brain decides what course of action is going to happen. We have some physical sensations, and then we take in the context and we decide what that course of action is. So, for example, if you have maybe a restless night and a kind of a jittery, giddy feeling, it might be that you have something really pleasant or exciting to look forward to the next day, or it might be that you're absolutely terrified about what's going to come next. They're both very, very similar, but it's the context that informs us and helps us decide how to interpret this stuff. So how do we get to override this? Is it possible? Well, considering that the emotions are built and not built in, then yes. Looking at what we've already talked about, the protective overdrive, the learning history, the energy conservation strategies, we can actually see now that, sometimes to override what our brain thinks is the best strategy is tricky, but it's possible. And it takes courage. This is why we're talking about courageous listening. Your brain is protecting you, and it's creating all sorts of stories to back up everything that it's been doing all along. It is bringing in those voices of the cast of thousands, whether it's your sarcastic voice, your passive-aggressive voice, any of these little things and tones that you hear in your head. And it's finding reasons to solidify your arguments for not changing. What we're doing... Oh, have we gone? Oh, well. You saw the slide. It's not going to change for a while. There we go. Okay, so it takes courage because your brain is protecting you, like I just said. Now, when we try to let go of anything, then what we're trying to do is go against everything that our brain knows has kept us alive. Okay, so again, that's like heading out from a little safe harbor that you've known all your life into an uncharted ocean. It is very, very risky. And this is why it takes courage to change and to do things differently. This quote is attributed to Lao Tzu, but I don't think that's confirmed. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. So if we are not a courageous listener and we let go of that, then we can become a different kind of listener. But that represents relinquishing control. Okay, we know how things go when we are the way we are now. Becoming a different version of ourselves can produce vulnerability and uncertainty. And as we mentioned earlier, that's not a good thing in your brain's kind of way of looking at things. So if we're acting differently, if we're showing up differently, if we're listening differently, these are all very vulnerable places to put ourselves in. What if that new approach that we're taking means that people don't take us seriously anymore? What if it puts us in that dying of embarrassment situation if it all goes very wrong? What if it just feels weird and uncomfortable? Well, anything that you start that's new or strange is going to feel uncomfortable, right? There's a bit of a learning curve. It will take time to bed in. So we're overriding the most fundamental thing that's going on in our brain, which is a desire to keep safe. And in my book, that is pretty much the definition of requiring courage. So let's look at some ways to access the override button. I'm going to share two things with you that are very, very simple but very effective if you can kind of keep them in your back pocket and pull them out when you are in those situations where you need to adjust your listening. The first one is, yes, laughably simple, the ABC as we call it. The A in this is for awareness. Notice what it is that you are currently thinking. Notice the situation. Notice what that person is bringing to you. Notice especially, and this is the important bit that a lot of these tools miss out, notice what you are feeling physically. Are you feeling tense? Are your fists clenched? Are your cheeks flushing? Are you rolling your eyes? So catch yourself being that older version of yourself. Interrupt it. Catch yourself trying to use those prediction loops and energy savers. Catch yourself being defensive. And then breathe. You were probably doing that all along, but now do it differently, okay? So when we breathe, a lot of the time we breathe quite high in our chest and quite shallowly, especially if we're seated. So one of the things that is important about noticing how we breathe is that we should be filling our abdomen. It's like you're smelling a beautiful flower. We should really be breathing properly because that then allows our breathing apparatus to deliver the optimum amount of oxygen to our brains. And as everybody kind of just in the post-lunch slump here, I can see a lot of kind of droopy eyelids and so on. Maybe you want to take a few nice deep breaths and get some oxygen back in the brain. So taking those breaths will get our thinking going properly. It will allow us to think a bit better, and it also gives you space to think. And the final thing here is to choose. We have to choose that next action, that next response. What is it that we're going to choose? What would the courageous version of you going to choose, or what would the courageous version of you going to, what the fuck, get out, what's, I've just lost a complete sentence. What would the courageous version of you say? And are you going to say that? Are you going to be courageous? I mean, this is your choice now, and I should probably have issued a caveat at the start of this because, once I tell you this stuff, it's now your choice. So with great choice, as they say, comes great responsibility. And that is it. That is literally the first tool, the ABC. And it's as easy to remember as they get. So do try it out, though. I mean, this has been a lifesaver for me. And there was one time my son came back from school, actually, and he was so starving, you just wouldn't believe it. He was about to eat the leg off the table. And I said, well, did you eat your lunch? And he said, no. So at that point, I had this choice. I could either have just gone into overwhelmed, busy mum mode and given him a bit of a telling off for not eating his lunch, or I could take that pause and then say, okay, how come? How come you didn't eat your lunch? Which was fortunately what I chose to do because he told me that he'd given it to his friend who didn't have any. So can you imagine if you'd someone who came to you with that, and that was the context of the story, and they got the face melted off them for doing the wrong thing when in actual fact they'd done the very right thing. Anyway, that's why I love this one so much. It is your friend, and keep it close. The next thing, are we moving on? Yes. The next is the Goldilocks Curve. Has anybody heard of the Goldilocks Curve in the brain? Yeah? Got one down the back? Excellent. Okay. So this is slightly more technical, but really useful and simple as well. One of the obstacles in the way of wanting to be more courageous in our listening and actually being that is the amount of stimulation that we're handling at any given time. Now, Amy Arnston, who is at Yale, uses this analogy of the Goldilocks curve. Everyone's got an amount of stimulation that suits them well. We want it to be just right. Not too much, not too little. Just right, like Goldilocks' porridge. Your brain is awash with these neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, and they are what helps all those lovely neurons to pass signals between each other. Some of the names you might have heard, things like dopamine and oxytocin, which are great for bonding, learning, they make us feel good, and other ones which are more associated with things like stress and danger, like cortisol and norepinephrine. You don't really need to remember the names. What you do need to remember is that if you think of this like there's loads of these and there's a cocktail bar, and when you get your recipe right, the world is wonderful. When your recipe is not right, the world is a bit less wonderful. So if we think of our levels of stimulation, which we generally refer to as stress, overstimulation is being stressed out. Understimulation is maybe being bored or just unchallenged. And then we've got that sweet spot, which we refer to as eustress. That is the name for the positive form of stress that just motivates us and gets everything going right. Now, we could literally do a full day on this, but we are very much running to the end of this. Anyway, we want to keep these things in the sweet spot. And if we don't, what happens is we get foggy thinking, poor impulse control, poor decision-making, impaired memory, black and white thinking, and lack of empathy. And I'm sure you can gather that any of these impacts is not going to help you when you want to listen to what your team is telling you. Yeah, that is going to take you well away from that. So take a second and think about these things whenever you are in that situation where you're trying to listen, and ask yourself, is it over or under stimulation that is getting in the way? So wrapping up, this is where I'm going to have to leave you. Our brains like to keep us safe, want to avoid uncertainty, and they want to conserve energy by not having to change if at all possible. And we can offset that with insights from neuroscience about things like neurotransmitters, about things like stimulation. We can practice these tools like the ABC and making sure that we have some level of a grip on our stimulation levels. And also, self-care, by the way, is brain care. So that is something to really take with you. Self-care is brain care. Your brain will operate better. Your cognition will be better. You will overall have more access to better, clearer thinking if you are looking after yourself. And then just those tools for intervention. So just think about what you can use from this, but also think about what difference it would make if everyone around you was using this too. Because if you are one person in a team and you're swimming upstream against people who are not aware of stimulation levels, not aware of how to, use the breath to make sure that they're getting enough oxygen to the brain, tap into that. Get them the support they need to do it, and honestly, you will have a more effective team. Now, this one, over to you. Reflection is a huge part of learning, of the learning process, and I would ask you to consider these things. Maybe not now, maybe not even today, but tomorrow, next week. Think about what has been most surprising in this. Think about what has been most useful to you. Ask yourself what you're going to try, and ask yourself what you're still curious about. So let it percolate, and I will be upstairs, by the way. I'm with Farset in the Maker Village, so if anybody has questions or wants to dig into it, come and see me for sure. And that is it. That is my LinkedIn code, by the way. If anybody wants to connect or say hi over there, I would appreciate it. And thank you so much.